Well, as I was saying a moment ago, we reported yesterday that Mauritius has overtaken South Africa as the most competitive economy in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's according to the latest World Economic Forum Competitiveness Index. We spoke to the WBF yesterday. Now, joining us to explain developments on that island nation, which allowed it to jump above South Africa in the index, is Raj Mukund, who's Director of the Joint Economic Council in Mauritius. Good morning, Raj. Perhaps the first thing to ask is, what did you do right and what did you do differently?
Well, good morning and thank you. Well, I think it's good news that Mauritius has moved 10 places from 54 to 45th, 45 in our Global Competitiveness Index ranking. I think the strength of Mauritius essentially are with respect to the institutions, the macroeconomic environment, and we are doing lots of work to improve the overall business environment. As you know, that Mauritius today ranks 19th in the Doing Business report of the World Bank. So there was major focus on improving the business environment, major focus on strengthening the institutions, but also over the recent years, Mauritius has been undertaking a number of major reforms. We have today a very good fiscal environment. The overall corporate tax is 15%. It is very simple process for the whole of the fiscal regime. We have also made major changes with respect to the labor regulations. That's also an area where we are doing quite well. We are trying to improve very much in the infrastructure. This is an area where we have still a number of challenges. But I think if we were to look at Mauritius of the recent past, we have to recognize that there were some major reforms with respect to the business environment, strengthening the institutions, improving the labor environment, improving the fiscal regime, a very sort of sound macroeconomic management. Today, the deficit of the budget is about 1.8% of the GDP. Our debt is about 54% of GDP. So I think these are some of the strong points, but today we are also facing a number of challenges, and we have to maintain, I think, the momentum of reforms. There are other areas where we have to make reforms. We have to improve our area access policy.
Raj, if I could just interrupt you there, just to touch on one of the points you made. I think the labour market in particular. Now, the WEF actually remarked in its summary of its results about South Africa's poor performance. A huge aspect of that is labour rigidity and so on. So I know the two economies are of a different scale. South Africa's economy is much bigger than Mauritius's, but in South Africa there are issues around labour rigidity, wage rigidity, productivity. So someone has to take the pain sometimes when there are reforms. So were there issues with the labour regime in Mauritius? Did someone have to take some tough decisions? Are there union issues in Mauritius where reforms could be blocked?
Yes, I mean, you raise a very pertinent point. The reforms took place in 2008 after almost 20 years of discussion and negotiations, because the last legislations were in 1974. Now, two things. We wanted to reconcile flexibility with some form of, let's say, a security whereby in case there will be some form of layoff, there would be some form of compensation to the workers. So the employers were asked to contribute to a workfare program. In fact, there was a levy of 1% for training, which went up to 1.5%, and part of this 1.5% of contribution by the employers have been used for a workfare program to compensate for a period of time during the job loss for some form of compensation and also to pay for training. So it was a trade-off of flexibility and increasing the contribution of the employers to give some comfort in case of a job loss, that there will be some compensation and some additional training for the mobility of the workers.
Raj, well, that certainly sounds like a sensible process to get the buy-in along the way. What about the structure of the economy? One thinks of Mauritius as dependent on a few areas such as tourism, such as sugar, agriculture and so on. So now you've got to be careful that if those sectors are so important, you've really got to look after them.
No, the economy today is very diversified, you know. Tourism represents less than 10% of the GDP. Sugar today is less than 3% of the GDP. Manufacturing, especially the export sector today, is above, you know, I mean, just manufacturing would be around 20% of the GDP. Financial services today will be around 11 to 12% of the GDP. ICT sector is about 6.9% of the GDP. So we have a very diversified economy. Over the last 10 years, we had new sectors emerging, like the ICT, like a further strengthening of the financial services. Now we are trying to develop Mauritius, the ocean economy component. There are about 5 areas we are looking in terms of ocean economy. Seafood processing, we want to develop port-related activities like bunkering, like transshipment. We want to develop also sort of deep water-related activities. We also want to develop mining, deep sea mining. So this is a new area on which we want really to move forward in terms of what we call today the ocean economy. So we have a very diversified economy over the last 40 years. You know, since independence, we've moved from sugar to import substitution, then to exports, then to tourism, financial services, ICT, and now we are trying to develop the ocean economy. So it's a very diversified economy if we look at Mauritius today.
Thanks, Raj. That's Raj Makun, Director of the Joint Economic Council. And listening to him there, one can see why they have leapfrogged above South Africa to become Africa's most competitive nation, according to the World Economic Forum.